Ukrainian aviation continues to strike the positions of the Russian army in the occupied territories and in Russia's border regions, targeting bridges and crossings used for transporting military equipment and personnel. As seen in drone footage shared on Telegram channels, these strikes, mainly carried out using Western-manufactured aviation bombs supplied to the Ukrainian army as part of military aid, have destroyed numerous crossings and positions of the occupying Russian forces, as well as houses where soldiers were stationed. The soldiers present at those locations were eliminated. It should be noted that recently, the Ukrainian army has increasingly used aviation bombs primarily produced by the United States and France to strike Russian military positions both in occupied territories and in Russia's border regions. As a result, a significant number of command centers, ammunition depots, military equipment, and personnel have been destroyed.
Exiled Russian opposition politicians and activists have been meeting to strategize for a post-Putin world since the early months of the invasion of Ukraine, the Moscow Times says. Until fairly recently, these gatherings have been largely homogeneous, bringing together the usual figures from Moscow and St. Petersburg. But as voices from Russia's ethnic republics have become increasingly noticeable to international actors, thanks to the efforts of dozens of indigenous rights and decolonial groups facing mass repressions at home, conference organizers have started introducing tacit quotas for indigenous representatives. This hardly makes these events more reflective of the diversity found inside Russia. Indigenous people remain disproportionately unrepresented on panels and among attendees, the Moscow Times reports. More importantly, these quotas do not help to build bridges between Moscow liberals and the communities colonized by Russia. When it comes to envisioning the future of their nations, Russia's indigenous activists and thinkers are firmly divided into two camps: the federalists and the proponents of independence. While the former believe that their republics can exist as part of a reconceptualized Russian federation, the latter believe that their communities will not have access to justice and enjoy rights guaranteed to them by international law unless they become independent states. Members of the Russian opposition and many of their Western allies are petrified of the idea of Russia's disintegration along its regional borders following the inevitable end of Putin's reign, the Moscow Times says. Yet their behavior towards indigenous counterparts makes that unwelcome scenario increasingly likely. Though the names of most indigenous activists might be unfamiliar to the public in Moscow and other historically Russian cities, this doesn't make them any less influential in their own communities. Indigenous activists' attempts to rebut these claims were met with undisguised giggles and murmurs from the majority Russian audience, some of whom complained that certain indigenous speakers' Russian was supposedly subpar. Yes, 11 years into Putin's bloody quest for protecting Russian speakers in Ukraine, linguistic purism has not lost its support base in the ranks of the Russian opposition, the Moscow Times says. Unlike their Russian counterparts, indigenous activists are universally multilingual. Many of them were raised speaking their indigenous tongues and learned Russian, English, and other fourth and fifth languages later in life. Most of them were shamed for their imperfect Russian at school. Some observers warn that Russia's disintegration would inevitably result in bloodshed and violence stemming from indigenous populations' alleged inexperience and cultural upbringing. Ukraine's deep strike campaigns are testing Russia's ability to defend its vast territory, with recent drone attacks reaching further than ever into the world's largest country, United 24 media outlet says. According to Al Jazeera on June the 19th, Ukraine is increasingly demonstrating that Russia's sheer geographic scale, once a historical advantage, is becoming a strategic vulnerability in the ongoing war. Stretching nearly 10,000 kilometers from west to east and spanning 17 million square kilometers, Russia encompasses over 11% of the Earth's landmass. But in today's war, this expanse creates logistical and defensive challenges, especially amid growing pressure from Ukraine's long-range drone operations. Lieutenant General Ihor Romanenko, former deputy chief of Ukraine's general staff, noted that Russia's size offers maximal capabilities for strikes, referring to it, ironically, as Ukrainian attacks reach deeper into Russian territory. From military leadership to civilian volunteers building drones in workshops, Ukraine continues to adapt, bypassing Soviet-era doctrines and asymmetric tactics. Ukrainian forces have launched repeated cross-border operations, securing positions in the Russian regions of Kursk and Bryansk. These incursions have forced Russia to divert tens of thousands of troops to domestic defense. Meanwhile, Ukraine's evolving drone capabilities have exposed gaps in Russia's air defense infrastructure, much of which was designed during the Cold War and remains stretched across large areas of western Russia. One of the most significant operations to date, Operation Spiderweb, was carried out by Ukraine's security service on June the 1st. The long-range drone strike targeted the Belaya Air Base in Irkutsk, nearly 4,000 kilometers from Ukraine's border. According to reports, the drones, possibly launched from Kazakhstan, damaged or destroyed strategic bombers. The same operation extended to the Amur region, over 7,000 kilometers east of Ukraine. Only a technical malfunction prevented further damage at the Ukrainka airstrip, United 24 media says. Military analysts have taken note. Mick Ryan, a retired Australian general and Lowy Institute fellow, described such operations as a warning that domestic military sites are now highly vulnerable to cost-effective and mobile threats that are difficult to detect or intercept. Now, Ukraine's drone campaigns routinely target military-industrial infrastructure in and around Moscow. Beyond the military, Ukraine has also focused on undermining Russia's economic infrastructure. A series of strikes on oil refineries and fuel pipelines have temporarily knocked out up to 14% of Russia's refining capacity, according to the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency. These strikes, seen as a response to Russia's repeated attacks on Ukraine's energy grid, have triggered a 6-month ban on gasoline exports, increased domestic fuel prices by 30%, and forced Russia to import fuel from Belarus, United 24 media says. Logistics have also been disrupted,